What do you got for me so far?
So far I have this, but honestly I really don't know where to go from there.
Okay, is this Professor Sun's class?
Yeah.
Exercise 13.5. So what do we have to do for 13.5?
So we're basically just replacing a text, which I have in a test file, and that's this.
Okay,
And
so
then-
morning.
Yeah.
Okay, so far what you have here is you have a variable called fopen,
Yeah.
and it's opening test.text and it's reading it. So the problem you have here is that fopen, if you want to declare it as a variable, there needs to be an equal sign after it, right? Because you're saying a variable is equal to something. Now, if I want to open a file, what function do I use to open a file?
Fopen.
Close. It is open, but kind of think of it like f of x, right? F of x is a function to something, right?
Right.
So open is its own function. So think of open as f of x. So f representing open.
Okay.
So if that were the case, what goes here?
Input.
Close. The word we just used was the function, right? Open. Right. So it goes before the parentheses. So what do you think goes here?
I'm not sure.
Okay. So if we look at it from a perspective of, like I said before, f of x.
Okay.
F representing what the function is, x representing what you're passing through.
Right.
Right? And we just said we wanted to use the function open. What does f represent here?
F represents open.
Okay, perfect. So we want to use open, right?
Oh.
So now we have the variable fopen, which represents the file being open in red, right?
It wasn't already open?
No, because when we use the function open, it actually opens up the file. And at this point, we can manipulate the file to do whatever we want.
Oh, okay, so you have to put it twice.
Correct.
Okay.
So now, do you know what the R here represents?
The read, right?
Correct. Yes, absolutely. So now we have a variable called fopen, and it's opening up the file, okay? Now, in order to save the data that's on there, you need to be able to read the data, okay? So how do we save the red data into a variable?
You have to be able to call it back.
Right. So that's absolutely right. But we want to save that data. So how do we save data in Python?
Well, like in a folder you can create like the test file.
Right. In this case, we're not saving data in another file or using anything else other than the data we have in this Python folder. So, for example, you use fopen to save the data that we open the text. So I want you to do the same thing, except I want you to use another variable to save data, and I want you to save the red data. So it's going to kind of look like what you have in your book here. You want it to look just like this.
Oh, okay.
So if you wanted it to correlate the same way, how would you type that here?
So I would just create a new variable.
Correct.
And have it equal to the next thing that I want it to do.
Right, close. So here, I'm asking you to read it, right? So here, if you look at this line right here, I want you to save the variable and read it. How do I do that? What function is used to read the file?
R.
Right, that's the variable. That's the type we're using, but we want the function. Right.
So you would type fopen.read.
Yes, correct. And we want to save that into a variable. What variable do you want to save that in?
txt.
Okay, let's call it txt. Go ahead.
For the text file.
Yeah, because it represents the data, right, that we're reading.
So that's okay.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine.
And then I can have the fopen.read part.
Yeah, exactly, because you called it fopen.
Right.
Okay, and don't forget the parentheses, because remember, it's a function.
Oh, I always forget that.
It's perfectly fine, don't worry. Okay, so now we have the file. It's being read. Mm-hmm. Now, we need to be able to save the information that we want to take out, because later on, we're going to write this information, but in Python, in order to write information, it has to delete information, then rewrite it. So we want to find a way to save the information, right? So in order to save the information, we have to create a new text and replace the old with the new, right? Mm-hmm. So now that we have the old red data piece, right? And we have a function that is called replace, okay?
Right.
How do we replace the old data with the new data using the function replace, the same way we used open?
Well, you'd have to create another variable and then add it with the old and the new.
Okay, so go ahead and do that for me. Go ahead and make a new variable, and let's call it maybe like new text.
Okay.
And you tell me what goes in there.
Okay, so using the replace, it would equal.
What do we want to do first?
Replace the old. So
Right.
I have to call that
What is that?
txt
Yes, correct.
variable
Yep.
into the old one.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Like that.
Yep. And what do we want to replace?
The old with the new. So
Correct.
that's what goes in parentheses. Is there a comma? I think there
Yes,
is.
because you're representing two arguments.
Right, okay. Like that?
Awesome. Perfect. Okay. So now we have the new data replacing the old data,
Right.
but we haven't used it. But before we can go ahead and write inside the same file, we have to close this file. So how do we close this file?
Just close, right? Fopen.close.
Yeah, go ahead. Perfect. Now, we used the write function, or I'm sorry, the read function before to just read the data.
Right.
Okay. Now we want to write the data. Okay.
Okay.
So, in this case, because most students that I have spoken to get confused on whether or not you can use the same variable that you use to read the file. You most definitely can, because in this case, we're going to write the file. Okay. So, how are we going to open this file and write in it instead of read it?
You would call it, but instead of the R, you would use a W for write?
Yes, because the W represents what?
Right.
Correct.
Okay.
So go ahead and let's use the same function, which looks just like the fopen before, except using W.
Right. So has to equal open. Open has to come again because
Yes.
you're okay.
There you are. And then we just need to be able to put
The
what?
W.
Yeah, exactly, because it represents right.
Okay. Like
Okay.
that?
Yeah. So now we did the writing portion, but what the function does with open write, it just means that this file is now writable and it's open, but we haven't written anything yet. So how do we write the information we used before and put it inside of this folder? So what will we do with this here and write in the new information we were given?
Would you have to create another variable
Um,
to write or no?
No, you don't really have to, because what we're doing is it's kind of like the same thing as we did with read. Remember how we did fopen.read and then in parentheses?
Right.
In this case, we're not using read because read has no parameters. So it doesn't have to take in information, but instead it reads information and gives it back to you.
But write doesn't?
No. In this case, write takes your information and puts it in the file.
Oh, okay. So you have to input or no?
We do the input before, but instead of going back to that step, because what I noticed in your code is you hard-coded your
Right.
test.txt, we have to go back to the way we're doing it hard-coded. So instead, we're going to use fopen, but we're going to write in it. So how do we write in it?
Would you kind of do the same thing you did up here, but use the write function?
Yes, absolutely. So go ahead and write that down. Just write fopen and then dot write.
Okay.
Okay, so this time, you see how read had no parameters? What do you think write is going to have? Because read has no parameters because we're reading the text, right? But write is a function that takes information. So what do you think the information is going to take?
So you have to give it the file that you're taking it out of? So it can read what it's doing?
No. You're reading from the same file, but It's grabbing the new data you created, right? And
Right.
remember, we had a new data. What was that new data called?
New.
New.
Just new.
Right. That's the replacement text, but we have new data, right?
Right.
And the new data is being is the
Oh,
function
it's
that's
the variable of this.
yes, exactly.
Okay.
So it's replacing it, right?
Right.
It's using the whole function to replace the two.
So that's what you would need to put in there?
Yes.
As a parameter.
Yes. So you would use the new data, which is called here new text.
Okay, and that's what I put right here?
Mm-hmm.
Does it have to be equal to, or is it just a parameter?
A parameter.
Okay. How do you know if it's equal to versus a parameter?
When something's equal to, it's a variable. When something's in a parameter, it's because it's using a function, and the function requires some sort of argument to go inside to give you information back out.
Oh, okay. So right here would go new text.
Correct.
And that's it?
Yes.
Okay.
You might want to reduce the space here between write and new text, just for syntax purposes.
Would it give me an error?
Not sure. Python's very strict with spaces.
Right.
So in some cases, it's best to just leave no spaces unless it's arithmetic or some sort of adding operations.
Okay.
Yeah, like, 2 plus 2. Then you can go ahead and crunch the numbers. But if not, it's best to just never leave spaces.
Okay.
So, now we have written the folder. Once we're done with everything, right, just like the read folder, right, what do we do when we're done writing?
Like you're done with the entire thing?
Mm-hmm.
Don't you have to close it?
There you go.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and close it.
So, open dot close.
Mm-hmm.
Does it know I'm closing the write instead of the read because they're the same function?
Right. Remember how I first discussed that some students, what they'll do is they'll assume that since this variable is being reused, that it's the same thing. The only thing is that fopen was used to read, and then we closed it. So we can go ahead and
until you
change.
open it again.
Yeah, exactly. We can
Okay.
change the data that goes into fopen.
Okay.
So now, what I noticed when we first started is that you hard coded. Remember how I said you hard coded text.txt?
Right. Is that bad?
No. It's absolutely not bad.
Okay.
A lot of coders later on, as they go into the actual field, what they do is they actually hard code everything. Then they start working with data that's received by the user.
Okay.
So now that we have it hard coded, we tested it, it works, right? We want to make sure that the user puts in the information now.
Okay.
So now, what's the syntax for a user putting in information?
I know you have to use input.
Okay, so then we use input, right? Now, you have to use input, but how do we save the information the user put into something? Just like we save other data.
Like a new variable?
Exactly. So we have 3 variables here. What are the 3 variables?
So it would be open, well, for the read, the write, and the input of the person.
That's the 3 variables we use now for the data, right?
Right.
But we need 3 for the user input, right? Mm-hmm. So we need one that grabs, the file name,
Right.
one that grabs the new text, and one that grabs the old text. Exactly.
Okay.
So how do we create these 3 variables, and how do we grab the input from the user?
Can you just use the name itself, like the file, old, new? Can those be the variables?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
So go ahead and write your 3 variables in.
So I have file,
Mm-hmm.
old,
Mm-hmm.
and new.
Okay. So how do you want to do file syntactically?
So it has to equal the input of something.
Correct.
Like that?
Mm-hmm. So input, and then what goes after input?
Well, you're trying to get the file, so would I just put the file?
So typically after input, it comes to a question.
Right.
So if you put input and then you put in quotes, let's say enter a number,
Right.
then you're asking the user to enter a number. So in this case, what are you asking the user to do?
To like pick a file.
Exactly.
So enter file.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
And then we want to do that with the 2 other variables, correct?
Right. So it would be input,
Mm-hmm.
and then old, enter old text.
Yeah, that works.
And then for new, it would just be the same, like input.
Mm-hmm. And then what question you want to ask here?
What the new text is that they're wanting. So enter new text.
Right. Perfect. And remember how I said it's best to avoid spaces?
Oh.
Because in some cases it
I
could just
do
give a syntax error.
Okay.
But yeah, after looking at this code, it looks good. Now I want you to explain to me what your code is doing from the top down, okay? So starting with file, what is it doing?
So those top three, the file, the old, and the new, are the input. So you're asking the user for information. So for example, like what file they want and the old information that was in that file to be replaced with a new input, which
Correct.
they create for that old file.
Correct. Now, starting from fopen to new text, what are we doing?
For new text? Okay, so fopen equals to open is basically just opening the text folder, right?
Right.
So that's all that's doing, and the R stands for read, so it just reads it.
Correct.
And then the new text is a variable, so that indicates that you have to replace it with the old variable.
Absolutely correct. Okay. And then what do we have to do every time we open a file?
You have to close it.
Correct. So now what is it doing from fopen down to fclose here?
So it's doing the same thing as the previous one.
Mm-hmm.
So after you close it, you have to open the new file, but this time we're going to be writing in it.
Okay, yep.
And that's why you have to have the parameters in the fopen write, is because you're actually doing something to it, not just reading it.
And what are we writing into it?
The new text.
From?
The old file.
Right. And then once we're done, what do we need to do?
Just close it.
All right, so let's go ahead and run this, see if it works. So we're replacing two words called morning, right?
Right.
All right. So now we want to enter the file. What file do we want to use?
It was test, I believe.
And remember the signature is?
.txt.
Exactly.
For the text file. Enter old text. Morning.
Because we're replacing those two words. And what do you want to replace it with?
My name.
Okay, that's fine.
So, Sarah. And then...
All right, let's go to the file, see if it worked.
where's the file?
It should be under the Explorer right there. There it is. There you go. Replace it, Sarah.
Cool.
There you are, and that's how you do programming using replacement words in the text.
Awesome. Thank you.
Of course.